girl bled from her palm when they handed her the brass taper. 40 candles waited on the altar in a half ring, each tall as her forearm. She was told to light them east to west. That was the law. That was how every coronation in 200 years had been lit. She bowed. She walked the line. Then she stopped at the western candle and turned her body the wrong way. She lit the western wick first. Then the next. The flames did not burn gold. They burned silver. The elder closest to her dropped his cup. The vampire king rose from his throne and stared at her wrist. He had buried a child with that same scar 19 winters ago. So why was that child standing in his hall, lighting candles backwards? Stay with me. If you have ever wondered what bloodlines remember, watch what comes next. Her name was Myra, and she had been a servant in the cathedral for as long as she could remember. The nuns who raised her had told her she was found on the cathedral steps in a basket lined with red silk. They said the silk smelled of iron. They said the basket had no note and no token. They said it was a small miracle that a child of 19 winters ago had survived a night that cold. Myra never asked who left her there. The nuns did not like questions. They liked obedience and clean floors and quiet hands. By the time she was 9, she could carry a full bucket up 2 flights without spilling. By the time she was 12, she could iron a cassock without scorching it. By the time she was 16, the head housekeeper had decided that Myra would be sent into the lower hall when the king was in residence. The lower hall meant the vampires. The lower hall meant silence. The lower hall meant you did not look up. The cathedral had been built above a Coven house. The 2 buildings shared a floor. The upper floor belonged to the nuns. The lower floor belonged to the Coven. Mortals served both. Mortals were paid in food and shelter, and the promise that if they kept their eyes down, they would live to see 30. Myra had a scar on her wrist. It was shaped like a small crescent. She did not remember how she had gotten it. The head housekeeper had told her once that babies do strange things to themselves, and she should stop staring at it. So she had stopped staring at it. Mostly. But on cold nights, when she was alone in the dormitory, she would pull back her sleeve and look at it. The scar was always the same. A clean crescent. No torn edges. No scab. The skin around it was always a half shade paler than the rest of her arm. She used to press it with her thumb to see if it hurt. It never hurt. It never warmed. It never changed. The dormitory she slept in held 8 other servant girls. They slept on narrow cots arranged along the long wall. The room was always cold. The girls were not unkind to her, but they were not close to her either. They had learned early that Myra was strange. She did not eat much. She did not cry. She did not gossip. She listened. She remembered. She kept her thoughts to herself. The other girls had decided she was simple. That was easier for them than the truth, which was that Myra understood more than she was supposed to and was wise enough not to say so. She had also begun in the last year to dream the same dream over and over. In the dream, she was very small. She was being carried through a snowy garden by a woman in a long gray cloak. The woman was crying. The woman kept saying, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." The dream always ended with the woman setting her down in a basket lined with red silk and pulling the silk up to her chin. Myra would wake up cold every time. She had never told anyone about the dream. She was afraid that if she said the words out loud, the dream would stop coming, and somehow she did not want it to stop. The vampire king was called Asriel. The servants did not speak his name out loud. They called him the Cold One or the Long Sleeper. He had not taken a queen in 2 centuries. He had not allowed music in the hall for almost as long. The senior servant said that he had been promised a child once, a girl from a rival bloodline. They said the child had been killed in her cradle by an enemy of the king. They said the king had walked into the nursery, picked up the small body, and not spoken a word for 40 years. Myra had heard the story the way servants hear everything, in pieces at strange hours, never confirmed. She did not believe it. She did not disbelieve it. She just kept folding sheets. She had seen the king only once before the morning of the coronation. It had been 2 winters earlier. She had been carrying a tray of cold water up the back stair when a door at the top of the landing had opened without warning. A tall man in a long dark coat had walked out. He had not looked at her. He had walked past her so quietly she could not hear his boots on the stone. But just before he disappeared around the corner, he had stopped. He had turned his head. He had looked at her wrist. He had not looked at her face. He had looked at her wrist. And then he had walked on. Myra had stood very still on the stair until she could no longer hear him breathing. She had not told anyone. She had not understood why she remembered that moment more clearly than any other moment of her life. She had not understood why, on certain nights, she could still feel the place on her skin where his eyes had rested. On the morning of the coronation, the head housekeeper pulled her aside in the kitchen. The housekeeper looked tired. The housekeeper said the candle bearer had broken her ankle on the back stairs. The housekeeper said Myra would have to carry the taper. The housekeeper said it was a small thing, a ceremony, nothing more, and that Myra should not be afraid. Myra asked what the ceremony was for. The housekeeper looked at the floor. The housekeeper said it was the lighting of the 40. The housekeeper said the king would be there. The housekeeper said every elder in the coven would be there. The housekeeper said the law was simple. East to west. 1 candle at a time. The taper does not leave your hand until every wick is lit. Myra nodded. She put on the white dress they gave her. She wrapped her bleeding hand in a strip of linen because she had cut her palm that morning on a broken jar in the scullery. She did not tell anyone. She was afraid they would replace her if they saw the blood. She walked down the long corridor toward the coronation hall. The hall doors were taller than 3 men. The guards opened them without looking at her. She stepped inside. She saw the throne. She saw the king. She saw the 40 candles. She had been told one more thing in the kitchen, almost as an afterthought, and she only remembered it now. The housekeeper had said, "Do not look at his face." The housekeeper had said, "No matter what happens, do not lift your eyes to the throne." The housekeeper had said, "Finish the candles, Bo, walk out, and forget you were ever in that room." Myra had said yes, ma'am, the way she had said yes, ma'am, 10,000 times before. She had not thought much of it. The lower hall was always like that. You did not look up. You did not speak. You finished your task and you left. It was just another rule on a very long list of rules. But standing in the doorway of the coronation hall, with the moon coming in slantwise through the high windows and the 40 unlit candles waiting in their iron cups, she understood that this was not just another rule. This was a wall. This was a wall built around something the cathedral did not want her to see. She did not know yet what was on the other side of that wall. She only knew that her cut palm was warm under the linen, and that her crescent scar had begun, very faintly, to itch. The coronation hall was lit only by the moon coming through the high windows. The air smelled of old wax and cold stone. 40 unlit candles stood on a curved iron stand at the foot of the throne. Each candle was as thick as a wrist. Each one sat in its own iron cup. The cups had been polished that morning by a boy who had cried the whole time, because he was sure he would be punished if any of them were dull. Myra stood at the east end of the curve. The taper was already lit. A small, steady flame. She had been told to bow once to the king, then walk the line, then bow once more when the last wick caught. She bowed. The king did not move. The elders sat in tiered seats above the throne, 12 of them, robed in red and gray. The senior elder had a long beard the color of frost. The youngest elder looked no older than a boy of 17, but his eyes were older than the building. Myra took her first step. She felt the linen on her palm grow warm and damp. The cut had opened again. She did not stop. She was halfway down the curve when something in her chest changed. It was not fear. It was something older than fear. It felt like a hand on the back of her neck, gentle but firm, turning her around. She turned. She was now facing the west end of the curve. She did not understand why she had turned. She did not remember choosing to turn. The taper was still in her hand. The flame was still steady. The king was still watching. She walked to the west candle. She touched the taper to its wick. The wick caught. The flame burned silver. Myra heard one of the elders draw breath. She did not look up. She kept walking. She lit the next candle to the east of the first. Silver. The next. Silver. The next. Silver. By the time she reached the 10th candle, she could hear the elders standing up. By the time she reached the 20th, she could hear the senior elder whisper a word she did not understand. It sounded like the word for daughter in a language she had never been taught. By the time she reached the 30th, the king had stepped down from the throne and was walking toward her. He did not stop her. He did not speak. He just walked along behind her at a slow, steady pace, the way a man walks beside a person he is afraid will fall. By the time she reached the 40th, every candle in the hall burned silver, and the room was so bright it looked like noon. She bowed. She did not know what else to do. The taper was finished. The cut on her palm had bled through the linen, and a single drop had fallen on the marble floor at her feet. The king did not speak. He knelt in front of her. A vampire king knelt in front of a servant girl in a white dress. The elders made no sound. The youngest elder covered his mouth with both hands. The king took her wrist. Gently, he turned it over. He looked at the small crescent scar. He said one word. He said a name. He said Leora. Myra did not know that name. She did not know why the king's hand was shaking. She did not know why the senior elder had begun to weep silently in the upper tier. She only knew that the room had gone very quiet, and that somewhere far below the cathedral, in the deep stone of the Coven house, a bell had begun to ring on its own. The king let go of her wrist. He stood. He looked at the senior elder. The senior elder nodded once. The king said, "Take her to the inner chamber." He said it without raising his voice. He said it the way a man says a thing he has waited 200 years to say. 2 guards stepped forward. They did not take her arms. They walked beside her, one on each side, the way you walk beside a person you are protecting, not a person you are arresting. Myra followed them. She did not understand. She was still holding the dead taper. The cut on her palm was still bleeding. The 40 silver flames were still burning behind her. The inner chamber was small and warm. There was a fire in the hearth. There was a single chair. There was a basin of water on a low table. The senior elder came in behind her. The king did not come in. Myra sat in the chair because her legs would not hold her any longer. The senior elder knelt and unwrapped the linen on her palm. He cleaned the cut. He bound it again gently with cloth that smelled of herbs. He did not speak the whole time. When he was finished, he sat back on his heels and looked at her. He said, "Tell me what you remember from before the cathedral." Myra said she did not remember anything from before the cathedral. The elder nodded as if that was the answer he had expected. He asked her how old she was. She said 19. He nodded again. He asked her where she had gotten the scar. She said she did not know. He nodded a third time. He stood up slowly. His knees cracked. He looked into the fire for a long moment. Then he turned back to her and said something she did not understand. He said, "Child, you were not abandoned. You were hidden." Myra asked him what he meant. The elder did not answer that question directly. He said only that the king would explain in his own time. He said that she should rest. He said that no one in the cathedral would harm her tonight. He said that she was no longer a servant. He said that as of the moment she lit the western candle, she was a guest of the Coven, and that the Coven would protect her with every blade it had. Myra sat very still. The fire popped once in the hearth. Outside, somewhere very far away, The bell that had begun to ring on its own had not stopped ringing. The elder bowed to her, which no elder had ever bowed to a servant before, and he left the room. The door closed. The lock did not turn. She was not a prisoner. She was something else, something the cathedral had not prepared her for, and for the first time in her 19 years she felt the strange, quiet weight of being seen. She set her bandaged hand on her knee. She watched the fire. She waited. The door opened again before she could count to 100. It was not the elder. It was the king. He carried a small wooden box in his hands. He set it on the low table next to the basin. He sat down on the floor in front of her chair, which was a thing no king had done in any servant's memory. He did not touch her. He did not speak right away. He just looked at her face for a long time, the way a man looks at a thing he has been told is gone forever. Finally he said, "Your mother's name was Sira." He said, "Your father's name was the man who used to sit on this throne before me." He said, "You were promised to me in the cradle, and you were taken from your cradle when you were 6 weeks old, and we were told you were dead." He said, "The woman who took you did not kill you. She hid you. She placed you on the cathedral steps in a basket lined with red silk, because the cathedral is the one place in this city where the rival house cannot enter without breaking a treaty that is older than any of us." He said, "The scar on your wrist is the mark every true born of our line carries. It is small. It is easy to miss. It is the reason the elders gasped when they saw your hand on the taper." He said, "The silver flames are the proof." He said, "Only the true born can light the 40 backwards." He said, "No one has done it in 400 years. He said, "The last person who did it was my mother." If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. He said, "The rival house has been told what happened in the hall tonight." He said, "They are already moving." He said, "They will reach the cathedral before sunrise." He said, "They will demand your blood." He said, "They will say you are a fraud." He said, "They will say I have invented you." He said, "The only thing that will stop them is a coronation." He said, "Mine and yours." He said, "Before the sun comes up." He said, "I will not ask you to do this." He said, "I will tell you what it means and let you choose." He opened the wooden box. Inside was a thin silver ring. He said, "This was your mother's." He said, "She left it for you on the night you were taken." He said, "You do not have to put it on." He said, "But if you do, you will not be a servant again." He said, "You will be a queen, and you will be hunted, and you will be loved by a coven that has waited 2 centuries for you, and you will be loved by me, and you will have to decide all of that in the next hour, because the bell has not stopped ringing, and the bell does not ring for nothing." Myra looked at the ring. She looked at her bandaged hand. She thought of every floor she had ever scrubbed. She thought of the basket and the red silk. She thought of the silver flames. She picked up the ring. She did not put it on yet. She said, "Tell me what they will do to me if I do not." The king did not answer. He just looked at her, and she understood. She put the ring on. The silver fit her finger as if it had been waiting. The bell in the deep stone rang once more and then went silent, and somewhere outside the cathedral, a horn sounded in the dark, and the king stood up and said, "Then we begin." He took her bandaged hand. He pressed his lips to the cut. He said, "Drink." She did not understand. He said, "A queen of this line must take the first drop from the king before she is crowned." He said, "It is not what you think." He said, "It is a binding, not a feeding." He cut the back of his own hand with a small silver blade from his belt. He held it to her mouth. She tasted iron and cold winter, and something that felt like a memory she had never had. The taste went down her throat and settled in her chest. The cut on her palm stopped bleeding. The bandage fell loose. The crescent scar was now a crescent ring of pale silver light. She gasped. He nodded. He said, "That is your mother answering." He said, "She has been waiting in your blood." He said, "Now they will all know you are real." The doors of the inner chamber opened. The senior elder was there. He had brought a crown. It was small. It was old. It was the crown of the lost queen. He held it out to her. Asriel took it from him. He placed it on Myra's head. She did not cry. She had not cried in 19 years. She was not going to start now. The horn outside sounded again. Closer this time. The senior elder looked at the king and said, "They are at the river." The king said, "Then we have 20 minutes. He turned to Myra. He said, "Can you stand?" She stood. The crown did not slip. The ring did not loosen. He said, "Can you walk?" She walked. He said, "Can you face them?" She said yes before she had time to think. He looked at her then for a long, quiet second. He said, "You do not know what they will say." He said, "They will tell you that you are nothing. They will tell you that you are a servant in a borrowed dress. They will tell you that your scar is a trick of the light. They will tell you that the silver flames were sleight of hand." He said, "They will say it to break you." He said, "Do not let them." He said, "The only weapon they have against you tonight is your own memory of being small." He said, "You have been small for 19 years because you had to be." He said, "You do not have to be small anymore." Myra nodded once. She did not trust herself to speak. The king reached up and adjusted the crown a quarter-inch on her brow. He said, "Your mother used to wear it like that." He said, slightly to the left. He said, "She did not like the way it sat straight." He did not say it as a king. He said it as a man who had loved a woman a very long time ago and had carried the small weight of remembering how she wore her crown every single day since she had been gone. They walked out of the inner chamber together. The corridor was lined with servants, every one of them on one knee. Myra had scrubbed the floor they were kneeling on. She had carried buckets past these same walls 1,000 times. None of them looked up. None of them spoke. The head housekeeper was at the far end of the corridor. The head housekeeper was crying. The head housekeeper had known. Myra understood that now. The head housekeeper had known for 19 years and had kept her safe by pretending not to. Myra stopped in front of her. The head housekeeper bowed her head lower. Myra reached out with her bandaged hand and lifted the housekeeper's chin. She said, "Thank you." She did not say it as a queen. She said it as a girl who had been raised by a woman who had risked her life every single day for 19 years and never asked for credit. The housekeeper did not answer. She just put her hand over Myra's hand and held it for one breath. Then Myra walked on. They entered the coronation hall again. The 40 silver flames were still burning. The elders were standing in 2 lines. The throne had been moved. There were now 2 thrones. The smaller one had been brought up from the deep stone. It had been waiting in a locked room for 19 years. The senior elder placed Myra on it. The king sat beside her. The senior elder lifted his hands. The coronation began without music, because the king had not allowed music in this hall for 2 centuries, and the only sound was the 40 silver flames and the slow, steady horn of the rival house drawing closer outside. The senior elder spoke the old words. The king answered. Myra answered when she was told to. She did not stumble. She did not know how she knew the answers. She only knew that the words rose in her chest the way bread rises in a warm kitchen, naturally, fully, as if they had been there the whole time. When the last word was spoken, the 40 silver flames burned for one breath taller than any of them, and then they settled back down, and the bell in the deep stone rang one last time, and the doors of the cathedral burst open. The rival house was at the threshold. 12 riders in black. Their leader was an old woman with a scar across her throat. She walked into the hall, ready to demand a fraud. She had crossed the river with steel in her hand and an old grievance in her chest. She had buried 2 husbands and a son in the long, quiet war between the 2 houses. She had not knelt to anything in 40 years. She saw the silver flames. She saw the crown. She saw the ring. She saw the king holding the hand of a girl with a small crescent of silver light glowing on her wrist. She stopped. Her riders stopped behind her. She lowered her sword. She said one word. she said Leora. She knelt. Her riders knelt. The old woman did not look up for a long moment. When she finally did, her eyes were wet, and Myra understood with a small clear shock that the rival house had not been the enemy she had been told they were. The rival house had been the one that lost a child too. The rival house had been told for 19 years that the line was gone. The rival house had come tonight to make sure the king was not lying about a queen, because if he was, the war would have started before sunrise. He was not lying. The treaty held. The bloodline held. The cathedral held. Myra sat very still on the small throne. The king did not let go of her hand. The first gray light of morning came through the high windows. The 40 silver flames went out together, gently, as if someone had blown across all of them at once. Somewhere in the kitchens, a kettle began to boil. The cathedral began another long, quiet day, slow and warm, and full of small, ordinary sounds. The old woman from the rival house stood up slowly. She walked toward the throne. She did not stop until she was 3 steps from Myra. She knelt again. She set her sword on the floor between them. She said, "My name is Yarrow." She said, "I was your mother's sister." She said, "I was told you were dead, and I was told a lie." She said, "I have spent 19 years hating a king for a murder he did not do." She said, "I am too old to take that back the way it should be taken back. But I will offer you what I have left." She said, "My house." She said, "My riders." She said, "My road." She said, "Every blade I command from this morning forward is yours." Myra looked at the old woman for a long moment. She thought of every bucket, every scrubbed floor, every quiet night in a cold dormitory. She thought of the dream of the woman in the gray cloak in the snowy garden. She thought that woman was you. She said it out loud. She said, "You carried me." She said, "You set me down on the basket." Yarrow did not answer. She just bowed her head lower. Myra reached forward and lifted the old woman's chin the same way she had lifted the housekeeper's chin in the corridor. She said, "Thank you for saving my life." She said it as a queen this time, and Yarrow wept openly, and the senior elder turned his face to the wall to give them the moment. The king walked Myra out of the hall when it was finished. They did not speak in the corridor. They did not need to. The servants were still kneeling. The housekeeper was still at the far end. The kitchens were warm with bread. Sriel led her to a window on the east side of the cathedral. He opened it. The morning air was cold and clean. The bell in the deep stone did not ring. It did not need to. The queen, who had been hidden for 19 winters, set her bandaged hand on the arm of her throne and finally let herself breathe. Outside the high windows, the sun came up over the city, and for the first time in 2 centuries, the Coven was not alone.